All right, as I hinted last time, after the battle with Grendel's mother, in the last major encounter in Beowulf is going to have to face off against a dragon. Um, and we looked at the trifold thematic pattern and tried to make some sense of it. But let me, because it skips so much here, let me go through sort of what the story skips before we jump into chapter 31. Then we can fill in the trifold thematic pattern a little bit and start making sense of things. So Beowulf hands the head of Grendel and the hilt of the magic sword over to Hrothgar. Beowulf explains to Hrothgar, fronting Unferth's noble weapon could do nothing. In amazement, Hrothgar stares at the face of what had been Denmark's evil and the hilt of the magic sword. We talked about that a little bit, sword representing the Bible or maybe a conversion of Denmark. Hrothgar throws another huge celebration in Beowulf's honor and once again shares his treasures with Beowulf and boasts how Beowulf's name will live on for all eternity. A glorious celebration ensues and Beowulf rests for the evening. All right, so this celebration, I think there's more that goes on here and is worth talking about. Again, we have a giant celebration, and Beowulf is rewarded with more treasure for killing this monster, and he gets all kinds of stuff again from King Hrothgar. He spends more time with Wealhtheow and the kids, and is more associated and a son to Hrothgar. Hrothgar is very sad because he knows Beowulf will be leaving him. And he's probably never going to see Beowulf again because he's old. And that comes across really strongly. So I think, that goes on. However, Beowulf does grow restless and wants to return to Geatland. He gives, he tries to give Unferth back his sword fronting, and Unferth tells him to keep it. And so he tells Unferth to keep his sword. So the two of them have exchanged swords, and he doesn't complain about the fact that fronting didn't help him. He takes it and says he's honored to have it. He goes back to his ship and he gives a gift to the watchman who is watching over his ship while he was gone. And then he and all of his warriors get on the ship with all of their treasure, and he gets ready to leave. And he says goodbye to King Hrothgar. And King Hrothgar makes this speech that I'm going to read to you because I think it's important thematically because it introduces our third theme. We know that the first theme is a young man's struggle, courage versus fear. Our second theme in the trifold thematic pattern is how to deal with despair of losing loved ones. What is the final theme? We'll see if you can pick it up from this speech that King Hrothgar makes to Beowulf right before they leave. Our eternal Lord grants some men wisdom, some wealth, makes others great. The world is God's. He allows a man to grow famous and his family rich, gives him land and towns to rule and delight in, lets his kingdom reach as far as the world runs. And who, in the middle of human unwisdom, in the middle of such power, remembers that it will all end, and too soon. Prosperity, prosperity, prosperity. Nothing troubles him. No sickness, not passing time, no sorrows, no sudden war breaking out of nowhere, but all the world turns when he spins it. How can he know when he sins? And then pride grows in his heart, planted quietly but flourishing. And while the keeper of his soul sleeps on, while conscience rests and the world turns faster, a murderer creeps closer, comes carrying a tight-strung bow with terrible arrows, and those sharp points strike home, are shot in his breast under his helmet. He is helpless, and so the devil's dark urgings wound him. For he can't remember how he clung to the rotting wealth of this world, how he clawed to keep it, how he earned no honor, no glory in giving golden rings, how he forgot the future glory God gave him at his birth, and forgetting, did not care. And finally, his body fails him. These bones and flesh quickened by God fall and die, and some other soul inherits his place in heaven, some open-handed giver of old treasures, who takes no delight in mere gold. Guard against such wickedness, Beowulf, best of warriors, and choose instead eternal happiness. Push away pride. Your strength, your power are yours for how many years? Soon you'll return them where they came from. Sickness, or a sword's edge, will end them, or a grasping fire, or the flight of a spear, or surging waves, or a knife's bite, the terror of age, or your eyes darkening over. It will come. Death comes faster than you think. No one can flee it. Okay, so clearly King Hrothgar introduces our next theme, which is the old person struggle, which many of you correctly guessed was death. How do you deal with your own mortality? We're all here on the planet Earth for how many years? When you get old, you know death is staring you in the face, and how you deal with death is an important element of your life. And this story, written to help teach Anglo-Saxons how to deal with the various struggles of life, is going to teach you how to deal with death. King Hrothgar is going to die, and he talks about that very clearly. But it turns out, let's get back over here to themes. So I'm trying not to give too many spoilers here, but hopefully this helps you. We've got this dragon, and the dragon is going to represent death, and we'll see that very clearly, and I'll sort of express that as we go. But the dragon is sitting on the treasure of a dead civilization. Everybody who used to own that treasure is dead. It's buried in the ground in a cave, which is very much going to be like the old Anglo-Saxons used to bury people in burial mounds with a bunch of treasures that theoretically they'd use after they were dead. So the dragon is very much like a representation of this. The old people used to burn their corpses too, and the dragon is a fire-breathing dragon. So the fight's going to take place in Geatland. It's going to take place in a cave, in if you will, a barrow. The actual translation of the Anglo-Saxon is Iromund, which is earth mound, which is a barrow, like a grave hill. The dragon has fire breath, so we go from a progression. We went from on land to at sea to in fire. Does Beowulf have any magic fire powers? We'll see. Again, Beowulf is a challenger, though. He's going to go into this fight fully armed. But we've prepped our reader for this theme. The Danes all died, and then Grendel died, and Esher died, and Grendel's mom died. Now Hrothgar is going to die. And then, we have some stories that happen when Beowulf returns to Geatland that the story is going to skip. And I will go back to the story, and we'll talk about those. So Beowulf goes back to Geatland. And when he gets to Geatland, he's working for this king named Hygelac. One of the things we get is the story of the kings of Geatland, and they just skip that here because it's not important to the overall plot, but it is important thematically. It turns out that Hygelac is the third son of the old king of Geatland, whose name was Hrethel. And Hrethel went through this really terrible situation. It turns out that Hrethel's first son was a guy named Herbald, and his second son was a guy named Hathsin, which I think is an interesting name because it's like has sinned. Anyway, Herbald and Hathsin went out hunting together, and Hathsin accidentally shot his brother and killed him, which makes him theoretically the next king of the Geats. Well, it's a problem because he murdered his brother, which of course is what Cain did to Abel, and Grendel was associated with Cain, so it connects with that. But the old king is feeling despair because his eldest son was murdered, but his eldest son was murdered by his youngest son or by his middle son, and it could have been an accident. And so he can't take revenge, and he actually just sort of wastes away and dies of sorrow and sadness because there's nothing he can do about this. And Hathsin becomes king of Geatland. But he starts a war with Sweden, and the Swedes kill him, and then Hygelac becomes king of Geatland. And so we get this story about more death and how we deal with death, but it connects with the earlier idea of despair and revenge and what to do when revenge is impossible and, like that kind of a thing. So we get that story here that sort of sets us up for this idea of death as well. So the death theme is starting to come on pretty strong. So I'm just gonna pick up here at chapter 31. Oh, what else you missed? Beowulf comes back to Geatland. He lands his ship, he beaches his ship, he goes up to the Great Hall, which is up on a cliff, and he meets King Hygelac. It's really interesting, King Hygelac, we talk about names that mean something. Hig is wisdom, and Hygelac is a lack of wisdom, so we're saying that the king is sort of an unwise king. It's interesting because he's married to a woman named Hygd, who literally her name translates into wisdom, so his wife is very wise, but he himself is not particularly wise. Anyway, Beowulf goes up to him, and he gives literally all of the treasure that he got, except for one horse and one suit of armor. He gives all of it to King Hygelac. So he's showing his loyalty to his king. In return, the king gives him a bunch of land, which is smart, actually, when a king gives a man land, because that man is now bound to the land and he has to defend it. And so it's a way to make Beowulf closer to him. And it lands a continual source of income, whereas treasure gives you income once, land gives you income every year through the harvest. So it's better for Beowulf too. He also gives Beowulf the ancestral sword of Geatland, the sword that belonged to Hrethel, his father. It's too big for Higelac to wield himself, so he gives it to Beowulf. And that's, symbolic of the power of Geatland to some extent being gifted to Beowulf himself. Beowulf gives the necklace, that fancy necklace he got to Hygd, and she takes that. And then Beowulf proceeds to sort of give an intelligence report on Denmark. He tells a story about Denmark, how King Hrothgar is trying to make peace with these guys named the Wolfings by marrying his daughter off to them, but he doesn't think it's going to work because nobody forgets, their blood feud because they married some girl, and he goes on. And of course, what he says actually comes true historically, so it makes Beowulf look really smart. But the author can do that when they know what historical events look like. So there's that, and then we get some history. It turns out that Higelac decides on a giant raiding campaign against the Frisians in northern Germany, and so he takes his boats and he sails south to Frisia, and it's an ill-conceived war. Remember, his name means lack of wisdom. And they sail up the rivers and start burning and pillaging, and then a giant Frisian army comes and attacks. And the Geats and the Frisians have this fight, and the Geats lose. Beowulf is in the fight. He's on one side of the battlefield, and Higelac's on the other. And Beowulf sees Higelac get cut down, and he just loses his mind and charges across the entire battlefield, literally killing everybody who's in his way. He finds the guy that kills his king, Higelac, and he drops his sword and he grabs the guy in his arms and he squeezes him until he bursts, which is horrifying, but shows you Beowulf's strength, I guess. But the battle is lost at that point, and they're all getting slaughtered, and Beowulf has to take the ancestral treasures of Geatland, jump in the river, and swim home. I guess it's good that he has unlimited swimming abilities. What's interesting is that then Beowulf is offered the kingship. Hygd, the wife of King Higelac, knows that her son Herdred is too young and too unwise to make a good king, and so she offers the throne to Beowulf. But Beowulf says, no, I'm not going to take the throne because a son of my king is still alive. So again, showing Anglo-Saxon values. He's loyal to the king. He's a good nephew as opposed to Hrothulf, who's a bad nephew. We talked about juxtaposition in the terms at the beginning of this unit, and I haven't really stressed it as we go through, but we're often given positive examples, negative examples. Like Beowulf is a positive example of somebody who has the strength of 30 men, and Unferth is a negative example of somebody who's a really strong warrior. So you get these pairs. And so Hrothulf is like the evil nephew of King Hrothgar. When he dies, he's like, I'm going to be king. And he's willing to kill even Hrothgar's sons to do it. And here's Beowulf, and he's offered the kingship, and he says, no, I won't do that, not while a son of my king is alive. And so Herdred becomes king of Geatland, which actually isn't good for Geatland in the long run, but whatever. So then Herdred becomes king, and Herdred, there's a civil war in Sweden, which is next to Geatland, and the rebels lose, and they come to King Herdred asking to become Geats, essentially. They're exiles, and he takes in these exiles. But remember, when you take in an exile, you take in all of their feuds. And so essentially he starts a war with Sweden, which would be, like the equivalent of Mexico declaring war on the United States. Sweden's a lot bigger than Geatland and more powerful. And so this seems like a bad idea. And they fight some battles, and the Swedes lose because Beowulf is fighting with Herdred. And so the Swedes, basically end up backing off because Beowulf is so incredibly strong. The Geats have like a superhero on their side. But anyway, let's get back to the reading. I think that's enough background that you understand what's going on. Afterwards, in the time when Higelac was dead, and Herdred, his son, who'd ruled the Geats after his father had followed him into darkness, killed in battle with the Swedes. Oh, by the way, Herdred died in that battle with the Swedes that Beowulf won, and Beowulf then finally became king because he was the nephew of the king, but he was the rightful king at that point. Killed in battle with the Swedes, who smashed his shield, cut through the soldiers surrounding their king. Then, when Hygd's one son was gone, Beowulf ruled Geatland, took the throne he'd refused once, and held it long and well. He was old with years and wisdom, 50 winters a king. It's the same age Hrothgar was, or same number of years he ruled when Grendel came, and the same number of years that Grendel's mom ruled. So half 100 seems to be an important number. 50 winters a king, when a dragon awoke from its darkness and dreams and brought terror to his people. That beast had slept in a huge stone tower. This is a mistranslation. Again, if you go to the actual Beowulf, you see it's Iromund. It's a kenning earth mound. Tower is a really bad translation. I think he's trying to create alliteration by using tower, and you can see in the picture here, it's an earth mound. It's not a tower.
With a hidden path beneath, a man stumbled on the entrance, went in, discovered the ancient treasure, the pagan jewels and gold the dragon had been guarding, and dazzled and greedy stole a gem-studded cup and fled. But now the dragon hid nothing, neither the theft nor itself. It swept through the darkness, and all Geatland knew its anger. Okay, so this is an incredibly short summary of what was going on. But yeah, Beowulf's been king for 50 years. So how old is Beowulf now? Well, let's assume he was 20 when he went to Geatland, and that he served King Hygelac for 5 years when he came back. That puts him at 25. Served Herdred for 5 more, puts him at 30. Then he's king for 50 years. This is 80-year-old Beowulf. He is an old man at this point, but he's still a superhero. So you want to hold that thought. So this is Beowulf in old age. Remember, what did we say this theme was? The old man struggle. So now we've aged Beowulf significantly, and we're going to have him face a dragon in his old age. Chapter 32, we got to figure out where this dragon came from and what's going on with it. And that's what this is going to give us some backstory, so it doesn't feel like it's coming entirely out of left field. Let's go back to chapter 32. Okay. But the thief had not come to steal. So how did somebody steal from the dragon? What made the dragon angry? Here it is. He stole and roused the dragon not from desire, but need. He was someone's slave, had been beaten by his masters, had run from all men's sight, but with no place to hide. Then he found the hidden path and used it. And once inside, seeing the sleeping beast staring as it yawned and stretched, not wanting to wake it, terror struck, he turned and ran for his life, taking a jeweled cup. All right, so backstory. There's a slave. Now, slaves in Anglo-Saxon England or in northern Scandinavia were people captured in battle. So this guy was probably a Swede. We're not talking like American South slavery here. But he was mistreated by his master and he decided to run away. Now the punishment for running from your master is the same. It's death. And so he flees and he's in a horrible situation. And so he goes and he finds a secret path and he's like, sweet, a secret path. And then he finds this cave and he's like, sweet, a cave, I'll hide in here. And he goes in the cave and he's like, aha, I made it, I'm safe. And he turns around, there's a dragon sleeping. And he's like, F, which is the old Anglo-Saxon word for oh crap. I'm kidding. But anyway, he sees this dragon and he's caught literally between, being killed by the dragon or being killed by his master. And he sees all this treasure and he's like, well, my master's a greedy son of a gun. So he takes this jeweled cup and he brings it back to his master to buy off his life, essentially. And it works. But when you steal from a dragon, bad things happen. Now, of course, if you read The Hobbit, this sounds interestingly familiar. Remember, J.R.R. Tolkien was a professor of Anglo-Saxon literature and taught Beowulf every year of his life. So did he steal some ideas from Beowulf? He certainly did. Anyway, back to it. So mankind's enemy. Again, humanity versus nature. The mighty beast slept in those stone walls for hundreds of years. A runaway slave roused it, stole a jeweled cup and bought his master's forgiveness, begged for mercy and was pardoned when his delighted lord took the present he bore, turned it in his hands and stared at the ancient carvings. The cup brought peace to a slave, pleased his master, but stirred a dragon's anger. It turned, hunting the thief's tracks, and found them, saw where its visitor had come and gone. He'd survived, had come close enough to touch its scaly head, yet lived, as it lifted its cavernous jaws through the grace of Almighty God and a pair of quiet, quick-moving feet. So the dragon's pissed. The dragon's pissed for a number of reasons. Number one, it's not a morning dragon. It doesn't like being woken up, and it's going to burn down Geatland because they dare to wake it up. Number two, its treasure has been stolen. It's a greedy dragon, and it wants its treasure back. I mean, we all know how dragons are, right? Like, they have an excruciatingly perfect count of everything in their lair. So the dragon wakes up, and he's like, human. He's like, my cup! Right, and he's horribly upset, and he's going to burn down Geatland for that. And then third, this human insulted him. I mean, if you're a human and you come close enough to a dragon to touch it, you're supposed to die. How dare you live, right? Like, so now he's got to go and kill this person so that he doesn't have to live with the shame of having a human come near enough to him to touch him and survive. So we've got sort of these three reasons. I think it's kind of funny. The dragon followed his steps, anxious to find the man who had robbed it of silver in sleep. It circled around and round. I'm just going to read tower as earth mound because it pisses me off every time I look at it. He circled round and round the earth mound, determined to catch him, but could not. He had run too fast. The wilderness was empty. The beast went back inside to its treasure, planning a bloody revenge, and found what was missing, saw what thieving hands had stolen. Then it crouched on the stones, counting off the hours till the Almighty's candle went out. That's a kenning for the sun. monsters only come out at night. They're afraid of the sun. The sun's connected with God somehow. And evening came, and wild with anger, it could fly burning across the land, killing and destroying with its breath. Then the sun was gone, and its heart was glad. Glowing with rage, it left the earth mound, impatient to repay its enemies. The people suffered. Everyone lived in terror. But when Beowulf had learned of their trouble, his fate was worse and came quickly. That's some heavy foreshadowing. His fate was worse and came quickly. We use the word fate, not God. We have this interesting tension between the two that we've seen a number of times. Vomiting fire and smoke. I also love that the action of breathing fire is vomiting. Like in order, whatever. Vomiting fire and smoke, the dragon burned down their homes. They watched in horror as the flames rose up. The angry monster meant to leave nothing alive, and the signs of its anger flickered and glowed in the darkness, visible for miles. Tokens of its hate and its cruelty spread like a warning to the Geats who had broken its rest. I mean, this is an intense moment. The whole of Geatland is on fire. You can see the glow of Geatland burning over the mountain hilltops far away. That's intense stuff. Then it hurried back to its earth mound, to its hidden treasure before dawn could come. It had wrapped its flames around the Geats. Now it trusted to stone walls and its strength to protect it, but they would not. More foreshadowing, pretty clear here. Then they came to Beowulf, their king, and announced that his hall, his throne, the best of buildings had melted away in the dragon's burning breath. Their words brought misery. Beowulf's sorrow beat at his heart. He accused himself of breaking God's law, of bringing the Almighty's anger down on his people. Reproach pounded in his breast, gloomy and dark, and the world seemed a different place. But the hall was gone. The dragon's molten breath had licked across it, burned it to ashes near the shore it had guarded. I mean, this is an intense moment. This is the Great Hall, the symbol of Geatish dominance and power. The dragon burned it to ashes. It's essentially like, you remember that old movie Independence Day, where the alien spaceship is over the White House and it's like boom, and it just blows up. That's what happened to Geatland. They just blew up the symbol of their power and burned it to the ground. Beowulf is feeling sorrow. His people are dead. His country is burned. He's feeling despair. When you feel despair, what do you need? The Geats deserved revenge. Beowulf, their leader and lord, began to plan it. Ordered a battle shield shaped of iron, knowing that wood would be useless, that no linden shield could help him, protect him in the flaming heat of that beast's breath. The noble prince would end his days on earth soon. More foreshadowing, pretty heavy. Would leave this brief life, but would take the dragon with him, tear it from the heaped up treasure it had guarded so long, and he'd go to it alone, scorning to lead soldiers against such an enemy. He saw nothing to fear, thought nothing of the beast's claws or wings or flaming jaws. Okay, Beowulf is planning a revenge. He's not going into this. He's the challenger. He knows if he goes in with a wooden shield, it's like wearing a torch on your arm. So he has this iron shield built, like a foot thick, that you need the strength of 30 men to wield. And he decides he's going to go and face off against the dragon. He and the dragon one-on-one. This is pretty intense. We're building up to a serious battle, and we'll see how it turns out. I got to break in with a little bit from the book here to help you out. The books, or this version, skipped a part that I think is really important. Like, where did this dragon come from? Where is the treasure? Why is it in Geatland? What's going on here? We need a little bit of backstory, and it is actually provided in chapter 32. They just sort of skipped it here. So let me read to you where the treasure came from before we get to Beowulf fighting the dragon. So here we go. That earth mound was heaped high with hidden treasure, stored there years before by the last survivor of a noble race. Ancient riches left in the darkness as the end of a dynasty came. Death had taken them one by one, and the warrior who watched over all that remained mourned their fate, expecting soon the same for himself, knowing the gold and the jewels he had guarded so long could not bring him pleasure much longer. He brought the precious cups, the armor, and the ancient swords to a stone earth mound built near the sea below a cliff, a sealed fortress with no windows, no doors, waves in front of it, rocks behind. Then he spoke. So the story is that there was an ancient and powerful race, and they all died, and they left behind this great treasure. And there was one guy left who guarded it, and he brought it all to this earth mound, and he went inside and sealed himself in there and proceeded to die on top of the treasure. Which is a metaphor for how pagans buried themselves with treasure. And this is written by a Christian, and of course that lesson that no wealth reaches to heaven that you see in, say, the Seafarer and some of these other stories being underscored here. Like, how stupid is it to bury yourself with gold? It doesn't do any good. But like the earth mound representing a place of burial, this guy dying, but the whole civilization dead. I mean, the idea that the dragon represents death, I think, is really well underscored here. But we'll keep going. The guy talks, and when he talks, it's essentially like an elegy. It's sort of like the Seafarer or the Wanderer, but it's within Beowulf. It's a monologue by this guy, the last survivor of a rich race, maybe the Romans, who's dying, and this is what he has to say.
Take these treasures, earth, now that no one living can enjoy them. They were yours in the beginning. Allow them to return. War and terror have swept away my people, shut their eyes to delight and to living, closed the doors to all gladness. No one is left to lift these swords, polish these jeweled cups. No one leaves. No one follows. These hammered helmets worked with gold will tarnish and crack. The hands that should clean and polish them are still forever. And these mailed shirts, worn in battle once while swords clashed and blades bit into shields and men, will rust away like the warriors who owned them. None of these treasures will travel to distant lands, following their lords. The harp's bright song, the hawk crossing through the hall on its swift wings, the stallion tramping in the courtyard, all gone. Creatures of every kind and their masters hurled to the grave.
And so he spoke sadly of those long dead and lived from day to day, joyless, until at last death touched his heart and took him too. And a stalker in the night, a flaming dragon, found the treasure unguarded. He whom men fear came flying through the darkness, wrapped in fire, seeking caves and stone-split ruins, but finding gold. Then it stayed, buried itself with the heathen silver and jewels it could neither use nor ever abandon. So mankind's enemy, the mighty beast, slept in those stone walls for hundreds of years. So that's a section that's skipped. But I think this is a section that makes the dragon represent death really well. It's got all this treasure that it can never use or ever leave, just like a dead body. The treasure's useless to a corpse. What's a dragon going to do with treasure? Go down to Kohl's and buy a new suit? I mean, like, it can't use it for anything. It's a waste. So I think that's pretty clear here too. Anyway, we'll get back to the battle here. And Beowulf uttered his final boast. More foreshadowing. This is almost as good as his first boast. You remember the first one about driving giants into chains and chasing sea monsters out of the ocean? This is his last boast. I've never known fear. As a youth, I fought in endless battles. I am old now, but I will fight again, seek fame still, if the dragon hiding in his earth mound dares to face me. And then he said farewell to his followers, each in turn, for the last time. I'd use no sword, no weapon, if this beast could be killed without it, crushed to death like Grendel, gripped in my hands and torn limb from limb. But his breath will be burning hot. Poison will pour from his tongue. Fun fact, Anglo-Saxon dragons not only shoot fire, but they have poison fangs too, so yay. I feel no shame with shield and sword and armor against this monster when he comes to me. I mean to stand, not run from his shooting flames. Stand till fate decides which of us wins. My heart is firm. My hands are calm. I need no hot words. Wait for me close by, my friends. We shall see soon who will survive this bloody battle. Stand when the fighting is done. No one else could do what I mean to here. No man but me could hope to defeat this monster. No one could try. And this dragon's treasure, his gold and everything hidden in that earth mound, will be mine, or war will sweep me to a bitter death. Wow, that was intense. So yeah, he's going to face this monster. He's going to face him alone. No one else could try to do what he's doing. Very confident, maybe arrogant a little bit, but there he is. Then Beowulf rose, still brave, still strong, and with his shield at his side and a mail shirt on his breast, strode confidently toward the earth mound under the rocky cliffs. No coward could have walked there. And then he who'd endured dozens of desperate battles, who'd stood boldly while swords and shields clashed, the best of kings saw huge stone arches and felt the heat of the dragon's breath flooding down through the hidden entrance, too hot for anyone to stand, a streaming current of fire and smoke that blocked all passage. So Beowulf goes down to the earth mound and the little doors open. It's like a blast furnace in there. You ever have a wood stove and open it up to put more wood in, you feel the heat coming out. Can you imagine sticking your arm in there? Can you imagine walking into that? That's sort of what Beowulf is facing. And of course, symbolic of death and the way they burn bodies and that kind of a thing. Also, I don't think it mentioned it here, and I think it's really important that you know it. Beowulf took the 12 greatest warriors from Geatland with him to face this final challenge. 12, of course, is exactly the number of apostles or disciples or whatever you want to call it in the Bible, and they're all standing up there. So, like, if this is all an allegory, right, and Beowulf's Anglo-Saxon Jesus and the dragon represents death, here he goes to face death on his own with these guys he brought with him. I think that's worth considering as we read the rest of the passage. Let's see. And the Geats' lord and leader, angry, lowered his sword and roared out a battle cry, a call so loud and clear that it reached through the hoary rock, hung in the dragon's ear. The beast rose, angry, knowing a man had come, and then nothing but war could have followed. Woo! All right, so the dragon's in this hall, and Beowulf comes down there. He's like, like he screams, and the whole like earth mound shakes, and the dragon's like, woo! And he hears that he's there, and he comes out, and it says, nothing but war could have followed. So it's civilization versus nature, the final battle. It's intense. Let's see. Its breath came first, a steaming cloud pouring from the stone. Then the earth itself shook. Beowulf swung his shield into place, held it in front of him facing the entrance. The dragon coiled and uncoiled, its heart urging it into battle. Beowulf's ancient sword was waiting, unsheathed his sharp and gleaming blade. The beast came closer. Both of them were ready, each set on slaughter. The Geats' great prince stood firm, unmoving, prepared behind his high shield, waiting in his shining armor. The monster came quickly toward him, pouring out fire and smoke, hurrying to its fate. Flames beat at the iron shield, and for a time, it held, protected Beowulf as he'd planned. Then it began to melt, and for the first time in his life, that famous prince fought with fate against him, with glory denied him. He knew it, but he raised his sword and struck at the dragon's scaly hide. All right, so I think this is a really important moment. Beowulf starts facing the dragon. We keep invoking fate instead of God. He's facing the dragon. He has this shield built for him that's solid iron and a foot thick. It starts to melt off his arm. You ever hold plastic over a candle flame and watch it melt? That's what I imagine this is like. But he realizes that he's going to lose. He knows it. It says it clearly. But instead of running away, he decides to fight anyway. So if the dragon represents death and Beowulf goes down to fight him, what are the Anglo-Saxons saying? They're saying, you're going to die. You can't win the fight against death. It's not about winning. It's about fighting, and about fighting well, right? And so that's what Wolf is doing here. He knows he's going to lose and he decides to fight. And this is a direct contrast, a juxtaposition, if you will, with Grendel. What happened as soon as Grendel thought he was going to lose? He wanted to run. He wanted to flee. He knew he couldn't win, and so he wanted to escape. Beowulf realizes he can't win. He's like, oh, well, I'm going to fight anyway, right? And he decides to do it. Look what happens next. Let's see. He knew it, but he raised his sword and struck at the dragon's scaly hide. The ancient blade broke, bit into the monster's skin, drew blood, but cracked and failed him before it went deep enough, helped him less than he needed. The dragon leaped with pain, thrashed and beat at him, spouting murderous flames, spreading them everywhere. And the Geats' ring-giver did not boast of glorious victories in other wars. His weapon had failed him, deserted him now when he needed it most, that excellent sword. Edgethow's famous son stared at death. He's literally staring at the dragon, but metaphorically staring at his own death, right? Unwilling to leave this world, to exchange it for a dwelling in some distant land, a journey into darkness that all men must make as death ends their few brief hours on earth. You want evidence of the theme? There it is. Quickly, the dragon came at him, encouraged as Beowulf fell back. Its breath flared, and he suffered, wrapped around in swirling flames, a king before, but now a beaten warrior. None of his comrades came to him, helped him, his brave and noble followers. They ran for their lives, fled deep in a wood, and only one of them remained, stood there miserable, remembering as a good man must what kinship should mean. So we're going to end this lecture with Beowulf being defeated by the dragon. He's down there on fire. He is Beowulf, the greatest warrior in the history of Northern Europe. He's wreathed in flames. He's screaming in pain. And he brought 12 warriors with him to help. 11 of them run away. One is left standing there on top of the cliff looking down, remembering what kinship should mean. It turns out that the only warrior who's left is one who is Beowulf's kin, his family. And we think he's a nephew, but we don't know for sure. It's a nice little parallel structure in the text that Beowulf, the nephew of a king, goes to help an old king. At the beginning of the story, he goes to help old King Hrothgar. And here we have another nephew of a king needing to help an old king in a battle at the end. But we'll stop there, and we'll see how this dragon battle ends in the next lecture. Thanks.